Hello and welcome to CTOs on Security, Meeting Data Protection Demands with Tiered Resiliency. Today we're going to listen in on a wide-ranging security conversation between CTOs from Pure Storage and Commvault, followed by an opportunity to pose your own questions. It's going to be a great session. So my name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this discussion panel. And before we get to the conversation, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you. So we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. We'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work for you, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to links to get started with Pure Storage and to get started with Commvault. Also in there, you can find a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section as well. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And finally, one of the best benefits of this event is going to be the opportunity to ask a question of our two CTOs. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event is over, the Actual Tech Media team will look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. So with that, let's get to today's important conversation. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Andy Stone, CTO for the Americas at Pure Storage. And we have Alex Janas, who's Field CTO for Security at Commvault. So now I'm going to turn things over to Andy and Alex to get us started.
Everybody, thanks for joining us today. I'm Andy Stone, CTO for the Americas here at Pure Storage, and I'm joined by my friend Alex Janas, Field CTO from Commvault. Hey, Alex, how's it going?
Pretty good. Good to be here, man. Good to talk to you again.
Likewise. We think we're going to have a fun afternoon here. So, hey, you just joined Commvault recently. What brought you over to Commvault? And what are some of the exciting things you're starting to see there?
Yeah, so my background, I spent about 11 years at NSA doing cyber operations, and then after that, I joined the private sector. I've been out here for about 7 years, doing pretty much every range of cybersecurity job you can think of, and I decided that I wanted to kind of have a bigger impact at scale. Doing a lot of cybersecurity kind of one-off, has a small impact, but Commvault has a product, data cyber resilience product that I think provides a better security solution for a larger group of people. It obviously addresses some of the more immediate needs, ransomware, the big topic right now. And so I thought that, me being in this space, I'd have a bigger impact and be, a hardcore cybersecurity guy in an area that typically a lot of cybersecurity guys don't go into.
Yeah, the group of truly offensive folks is pretty limited, I would say, out in the quote unquote real world, right? So having that level of experience is certainly unique and differentiated. I mean, ransomware, huge topic, I think, everywhere. It's what I see a lot of. In fact, I had, I think 4 or 5 customer meetings this week alone on just ransomware as a topic with various companies and how to protect kind of before, during, and after an attack, that whole kind of setup. But I mean, ransomware continues just to be the de facto malware of choice, I would say, that everybody sees in the environment and is most concerned about, at least right now. I guess, I have some thoughts on ransomware and the attackers, but I'd love to hear kind of your opinions on them too. But, maybe it'd be helpful if I kind of start and then see where you want to go with things here. So
Yeah.
I mean, my view on the ransomware guys is they're really not that sophisticated anymore. That a lot of them are more business oriented, out looking for somebody to attack. So they're doing a lot of research on who has deep pockets to pay and who has a cyber insurance policy, how much it's for. But most of the time, what I'm finding is they're going and renting the ransomware as a service from a RAS provider, using that tooling to basically get in, elevate their privilege, and then launch the initial attack. They're not even doing like their own credential acquisition in a lot of cases. A lot of times they're going like, and in the initial access brokers and others just to acquire credentials. Are you kind of seeing the same thing, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that money's definitely changed the industry, the attacker industry. I think that in the early years, if you look back at how defenders and other security researchers sort of evaluated attack groups, APTs, they were sort of on the really linear range of script kiddie to elite nation state APT, and basically TTPs were applied to an individual group because that group kind of looked like what they did. But nowadays, with the boom of cybercrime, you're kind of as good as the sum of your parts. And so you've got these groups that concentrate on very specific things now. So they can work on just the ransomware tool. They can work on getting the access brokers. They could work on the vulnerabilities, and everything's essentially a commodity and a bigger industry. And so you're as good as your connections and what you can afford to pay for. And so you might have access to a big company, but somebody else got you that access you paid for.
That's right.
And so like, what's a TTP look like for that? I imagine it looks like a very, like a multi-personality group. If you look at it, the way the exploit was thrown, the way the access inside the network where they pivoted, and how they carried out that ransomware negotiation and interacted with the victim, they all could look completely disjoint, completely different.
Yeah, like
And
a
how you track,
hydra. Yeah,
yes.
a bunch of heads connected to a common body. But yeah, yeah.
Yep, exactly. As far as sophistication goes, I mean, inevitably, like I said, it's going to all look different. Using a very sophisticated exploit that was given to you doesn't really take much if it was designed well. It's going to work as good as any exploit does, which, but inside the network, I mean, I've seen, what some people attribute to being a really sophisticated ransomware in a document saying these guys are the best ever, but yet they do certain actions that don't really make any sense, like running sketch task like 200 times and having it fail, and having that be logged and not cleaning it up and not even caring about it. But again, the other part of this is in the early days when I first got into the private sector, I would have these conversations with clients where I felt like I had to convince them that they were a threat, and they usually would rationalize it saying, well, I don't have anything anyone cares about. But ransomware, the silver lining is that it is exposed, normal regular companies, people that don't know cybersecurity or do it as a job. It's exposed them to the realities that opportunity is really more important, and everybody is a victim because everybody has an opportunity to provide a criminal with money, right? And so, we used to say, it's not a matter of if you've been breached, it's when.
Yeah,
but I would modify that to, it's not a matter of if you were breached, it's when you detect it. And because
exactly.
and today I think the indicator that a lot of current security is overburdened. I won't say it's failed. I'd say that it's overburdened, having to look across a huge threat landscape. People's perimeters have expanded, and I think that the fact that the first indication of detection is the ransomware note is kind of telling about how well that works, right?
Well, that's funny that you say that, because I get really frustrated with a lot of the vendors that we have in this space. Like a lot of our competition, not naming names, of course, they'll go out and they'll claim they have an integration that can detect ransomware in your environment, or can tell you the magical golden point that you need to be able to recover to if you have an event, which you and I know is total nonsense, right? But to people that don't know the difference, this sounds like magic, right? And they're like, holy cow, I need that. And you have to take the time to explain to them, yeah, that doesn't really work. But Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on the thoughts there in terms of the, how those attacks are unfolding and the things that we're starting to see. I know along those lines, all the guidance. So as I talk to, different federal agencies, and we're presenting on different topics, all the guidance that's published, you put out in writing from CISA, the White House, the NSA, everybody else, like they're talking about two core things nowadays. They're talking about visibility and resiliency, right? And pretty much the two things that we've always been touting kind of in different forms. But, you know, I guess on, starting with the visibility piece, one of the things that I tell folks, on the storage side is you have to be able to, first of all, look at all of your infrastructure, right? You don't try to pick and choose what you're going to ingest data from, because the way these analytics tools works is they ingest data and they correlate data, right? Kind of two parts for a Splunk or Elastic or whatever. And if you don't ingest from all your endpoints, you have no visibility. You might as well, not bother, because you're ultimately guessing and hoping that you're right. And then, the second piece is being able to correlate the data very quickly across three areas: the network, the endpoint, and the end user. And so, storage a lot of times in that equation, which is, I know, different than what you guys are focused on, but, from our perspective, it becomes a bottleneck. So when you look at a lot of the common storage that's out there, the controllers that these organizations use, the vendors use, to provide the storage platform for the analytics solution itself, becomes a bottleneck. And what it does is creates it so that you can either ingest data fast or you can correlate data fast, but you can't do both. So ultimately, when you get into the cyber threat hunt mission, you're now limiting the ability for the cyber threat hunt team to really react very quickly, like what you were saying, right? If the first indicator that you're getting is a ransom note, you're SOL, right? I mean, you're now recovering.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out, like, how can you speed up the analytics process so that you can create searches that are really fast and that can detect, hopefully, an adversary in the environment before they break out. So between the time they log in as a regular user with those bot credentials and they elevate their privilege to admin, right? So, what are your thoughts on, I guess, on analytics as a whole? Would you agree with that? Speed is
Yeah.
of the essence kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts to this, right? There's the, speaking purely from the pure cybersecurity perspective, the telemetry, information, intelligence, these are all super important. The more you know about what's going on, the better. Of course, there's probably a relationship with the fact that, the more you know, the more you have to analyze. And so, like, probably one of the biggest burdens I see with, traditional defenders, your SOCs, the people who are monitoring the SIMs and the SOARs and everything,
Yeah.
they will have a mountain of white noise, of false positives to deal with.
Ton.
And it's
Yeah.
just, it's essentially just an endless hamster wheel for them. And so it's very important to get the fundamentals right. And in every body of knowledge that I've ever interacted with, the fundamentals always play key, even in the advanced parts of doing that thing. And cybersecurity is definitely part of that. Defense is definitely part of it. It's very important to understand the fundamentals of what it is you have, what it is that you're like, what's most important, prioritization of it,
What are you
and
protecting?
and
Yeah.
right, and then also just understanding what risk really means, like what's a and knowing that risk to you is different from risk to someone else, right? And so
Absolutely.
so yeah, so to that point, like yeah, you're right. The sprawl is real. Everyone has like these huge multi-platform, on-prem, in cloud, multi-cloud, multi-tenant, in cloud, like sprawl of perimeter, all these devices, users working at home, users working wherever remotely. And so so knowing, where everything is, knowing what's important and how to prioritize to filter it out and at least process the important things first. And then when you're done, like maybe correlating those main events with other stuff. I
Okay.
think the traditional mistake in the defensive world is to look for individual things, but the reality is you'll find too many false positives. And so
Yeah.
what you need to do is, if you see a user logging in or failed attempts for login, you have to correlate that with other events. Otherwise, that's just a person typing in their password wrong. And
Yeah.
then that's not that big a deal. But when you correlate it with, like, GeoIP and something else and all these other events that are happening, then you get context, and then you actually have like something meaningful to hand to a security professional to actually investigate further.
Yeah, doing that correlation, again, network, endpoint, end user, those three areas, and then being able to enrich the, anomaly that you initially saw so that you can orchestrate out to those cyber threat hunters is critical. But, speed, I think, is the absolute key there. And that
Yeah.
getting your searches down to the lowest amount of time possible. Like that gives your cyber threat hunt team an actual fighting chance is what I would argue. But
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, so beyond that, ultimately, during an attack, obviously, there's little you're going to do. You're going to isolate and you're going to try to stop the event. So you're really getting into recovery at that point, which is, what I see is everything about resiliency. And with resiliency, what I'm telling customers nowadays is you need to build a tiered resiliency architecture, something that looks like a primary tier of recovery using snapshots, preferably, have a middle tier that can be that also of snapshots where you're copying from the primary tier to the middle tier, keeping them for as long as you can afford so you can use them for forensic purposes later potentially. And then you have the backup tier, which has multiple uses, amongst them orchestrating a recovery, but also long-term data retention and compliance. So, I mean, that's kind of how my view of the world and how Pure is kind of talking to folks. How's that aligned to some of the things you're saying and seeing and doing, I guess?
Yeah, for me, in the offensive world, it was a little bit easier. It was
Yeah.
less about like,
Yeah.
caring about these kind of details. And so, since I've been more involved in the defensive world and adding my offensive perspective to that, I have definitely learned some really interesting some things. And I think this kind of contribution is expanded. I think you're absolutely right. From an attacker's perspective, the game is basically move, counter move, right? And so ransomware first targeted the data and it had a big impact. And the people who had backups found out if they actually had them and if they could restore or not and how fast they can restore. To your earlier point, we learned pretty quickly when we had customers that were dealing with ransomware that had backups. It was like, okay, let's do it. And it didn't work. They never tested them, or when it did work, it was a lot slower than they thought. And so, while they were able to recover from the catastrophe of losing their data, they were not. They were down business. They had an impact on business. And so, to your point of what you're trying to say, I think that the early impacts were not just to destroying the data; they were also impacting their business. But in the move counter move part, attackers will feel like they're not getting a return on investment, and so
Right.
they will start to
They
target
evolve.
more systems like the
So
backup.
not to break your flow, but one thing I want
Mhm.
to point out there, on that initial move. So what we had done together as organizations was we built an integration, right? That basically
Right.
said, look, we see that it's too slow, so it needs to be faster. And the integration that we came up with is actually recovers at like 270 terabytes an hour, which compared to most solutions, your average backup restore time is or rate is generally like 2 to 6 terabytes an hour if you're lucky, right? So we're like Pure and Commvault are orders of magnitude faster, as we started that initial journey. But to your point, yeah, now it's evolved. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, and that's right though. You're absolutely right. That, like, to me, that's one of the first lessons I learned being out in the private sector, focusing on both sides and seeing, how important that is, like how big that impact on business plays. Because, like destroying the data, can easily be solved by backup, but there's more to it than that. And then the
Yeah.
next step is, so the next step is being fast, and then the next step beyond that is protecting that data. And I think that's where that data resilience platform, cyber resilience, actually comes from. Is that you can't make a product today and not have cybersecurity involved. Everyone's like, well, I don't want to be a cybersecurity company, and I think that that's sort of silly notion, right? Your grandmother has to have some knowledge of cybersecurity because she's also targeted by scammers, and so everyone building a product has to build this into their product, if at all, at a minimum, to either be part of the layered solution of cybersecurity, but also you'll have to protect yourself. You have to protect your layer. And that involves protecting, the login to your system, protecting the actual integrity of whatever it is. Like for us, it's protecting your backup, protecting your data, protecting all the access to that, protecting the ability to restore that information as fast as possible.
Yeah, I think the other piece that I see a lot of times that folks don't really think through are dependency chains, right? Because it's not, you don't just go and back up or restore something. You have to know what order you're going to restore. And so, from an ordinality perspective, what comes first, second, third, fourth. And oh, by the way, you better make sure you can recover your critical infrastructure like Active Directory, DNS, and time service first, because nothing works without those, right? So
Yep.
I think that I see a gap a lot of times for folks, because to your point, what happens is they do all this stuff, right? They build this architecture or whatever, they do a lot of backups, but they don't really test end to end. And usually it's because of one of two reasons. One, it requires a lot of effort and space, equipment, other stuff, right? But two, it requires time. And you can't necessarily get it complete in a time window that you might have to actually run a full recovery, right? So it's unfortunate that organizations kind of get into this area, but I see it time and time again. And I think, in fact, I think we're kind of seeing it as a result of one of the latest breaches, the MGM attack, right? I mean, taking a really long time to get back up and running, probably reasons why. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, like you said, where our companies come in to play is being able to do that at scale, at speed, and being able to represent that early in the conversations with their clients to let them know, like, this is important. We're not just talking about backups. We're talking about this whole story about end to end about what's going to happen to you, focusing on this as a cybersecurity event, right? This is where this fits in that model. And exposing that to them so that they understand what to expect, so that no one's surprised. And I think, back to that conversation about understanding the fundamentals, knowing how your systems are, how you're going to respond to this event is like the first step to that, right? Because, there's the saying about everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. That doesn't mean you still have a plan. It's just, you're just kind of, the rubber's meeting the road there, and you might have to be flexible and adjust, but not having a plan, I will argue, makes getting punched in the face, even worse, right? And so you should still have a plan. You should still understand what's going on, and you should still, think about this from end to end.
You better at least know how to get your hands up so you don't get punched in the face a second time.
That's right. You should learn. Well, that's the next step, is learning from that situation, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, I think one of the things I wanted to talk about, in part of that resiliency architecture is snapshotting and pure safe mode snapshots, which are really unique, because a lot of times out in the industry, we hear this talk of immutability. People are like, oh, you have immutable snapshots. And it's like, yeah, everybody has immutable snapshots. Immutable snapshots don't matter. It's nonsense, right? Because all immutability means is that, once data is written, it can't be changed. Well, like, as a bad guy, if I get into your systems, or when I get into your systems, and I elevate my privilege, move laterally to your storage arrays, guess what? I'm going to just delete your immutable snapshots. So at Pure, we've developed a solution called Safe Mode that actually makes it so those snapshots can't be deleted without invoking a Pure support process out of band. So they have to call into support and do a bunch of validation and other stuff. And Pure support ultimately can help delete data from the arrays. But what's your take, I guess, on immutability? Do you have the same thoughts and feelings I do about it? Like, so what? Or you think there's more value there?
Yeah, no, I think it's important. I think that, and I know the stuff that you guys have, and we also have we have some similar things about immutable backup and indelible backups, the compliance lock, worm storage, actually writing to something that's software and actually something that's hardware, that's a worm media. I think it's important, and I think it's important to have it at layers always. I mean, that's the one thing that the security industry has said, that the one consistency that the security industry has had is that layered approach always happens, or it always is best. That you can never, you could argue that at some point in time there's probably diminishing returns, but I would say the more you can segment things and more you can defend a thing, that means the more chances you'll have to raise the risks and the costs to attackers. Its costs are, like risks are, to their commodities, like their exploit or, their OPSEC, like, the more things they have to do, the more likely they will either hit a brick wall and not be able to go further, or that it'll be a place for you to detect them, because they'll have to do yet another thing, which is an opportunity for you to detect them. And so same thing here, like, stopping them ultimately, like, that's great. I think there's always two sides to this. There's the prevention and there's the detection. I think prevention's important, but I think that there's a point at which you're going to hit a diminishing returns, because you ultimately don't know what you don't know. And so I think things like worm media are great. I think that's great prevention. But at the same time, you've got other layers even before that hopefully should catch it. But at a minimum, it's always there, so that's good, right? And inevitably, like I said, attackers, if it's a good attacker that has the time, and if this is valuable to them, if this will be a big payout, they will take the time.
Definitely.
And they'll start targeting your backups more precisely, and I think you'll see that with, like, especially with these ransomware gangs. I think the lower opportunity, the lower return on investment targets, they'll put their B team guys, C team guys, D team guys. But when it comes to something big like an MGM, they know that's a big payout. They're going to put their good guys on that because they know it's worth the investment. Which is kind of something that should open everyone's eyes, right?
Well, and when you get a new attack group like that one, right, they're out to make a name for themselves, so you can guarantee they're going to even put additional investment behind it. So it gets kind of
Sure.
crazy. But yeah, I think completely, I completely agree with you. I think indelible becomes a really big thing. One of the things we learned through Defense in Depth too is it's not just having the multiple layers, but you've got to almost build consistency between layers. Because you think back to the days where you had the folks coming out saying, oh, you need to have different types of firewalls or different brands of firewalls at every different layer. It's like, we learned pretty quickly that's probably not the right thing to do, because it becomes a pretty horrendous thing to try to manage.
Yeah.
So, while yes, there might be some benefit somewhere, I also have the same kind of perspective when it comes to scanning. You talked about prevention, so scanning at different layers. And today we have anti-malware on endpoints, right? You're generally doing scanning at the network layer, so the network gateway. A lot of organizations are looking at scanning back on the storage RAID, even maybe Pure, right? Personally, I find that a couple of layers of the prevention component is probably enough. I don't know if you're not catching it at point 1 or point 2, I doubt that point 3 is going to be any more successful. So to me, it just becomes overhead at a point. But I know one other thing that I kind of wanted to touch on, just kind of FUD that we hear about in the in the real world, so to speak, I guess, is this concept of air gap, right? And so I spend a lot of time telling folks, my storage vendor, they'll come say, yeah, my storage vendor wants me to put an air gap in place. They have a solution called air gap, and basically it means I'm going to sell you a second set of duplicative infrastructure, and then I'm going to sell you a services arrangement to put the two together with virtual networking rules. And at certain times a day, those rules will put down a virtual drawbridge that now data can flow across. And when you're done, the drawbridge goes up and you have this, air gap thing. I'm like,
Yeah.
look, that's total nonsense, right? Because first of all, we know when the bridge is going to come down, and it's not down for just a few seconds; it's down for hours, and both sides of that equation become exploitable, right? So, to me, air gap, you can't have an air gap in a corporate environment. We could have it in DoD because we had physically segregated network infrastructure on the back end, separating a classified and non-classified network. But what's your take on air gap in a corporate environment, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we would stop using the word air gap because it means
Yeah.
something different to people like me.
Yeah.
There's always sort of the joke about, like, even quote unquote physically separated networks, well, I mean, almost inevitably I would say, are you sure? And certainly here, when people talk about it, they always, I think what alarmed me the most was when the conversation would happen and I had this idea of what I thought they meant by air gap, and then they would say, so I remotely connected into the air gap.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's not possible. That's not what an
yeah,
air gap
yeah,
is.
yeah,
So I mean, maybe the better word is sandbox, because I think that
yeah,
there is value in having it, because I think that there's some disaster recovery stuff that you could do, and there's some testing
yeah,
that you could do, and you kind of want to have some sort of a isolation to it. Like if you know that the network is truly limited in how remote access can be had into it, like single IP, single process, like whatever, like those, that makes it a good place to do things. I still wouldn't call it air gap, obviously, by the pedantic, like
yeah.
strict definition of the word air gap, but I mean, for the purposes of like its value, I think there's still stuff there that you can do. And I think that yeah,
I just feel
so
like
I
it gives a false sense of security in a lot of cases, because it's that combined with, oh, we know the point in time to which you need to recover, the golden point,
yeah.
where the infiltration occurred, which is total BS, right? Until you start doing forensic review, there's no software that's scanning an image coming in that can tell you the point in time, right?
Yeah, well,
You
so
might know
yeah,
when
and
it
and that
started encrypting data, but that's about it. Yeah,
right, and that's yeah, that's actually something else I wanted to yeah, definitely bring up, was that for me, I think that there is like sort of, I won't call it complacency, maybe there's like a normalization that's happening with the word ransomware, and that we're very used to saying it, and like here's an indicator, people have insurance for it, and to me that means that's
yeah,
an acceptance. Like I like the idea that people are accepting the fact that a breach will happen, but I don't like the idea that they're comfortable for it, and that there's legitimate businesses that are in place that acknowledge that it will happen. That's not what's supposed to happen. It's supposed to scare you. It's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. It's supposed to make you be angry and want to do something about it. And so, like, for me, I think I would like to remind everyone that when a ransomware event happens, that is the symptom of a breach, and that's what you really need to be focusing on. And to your point about incident response, that when data resilience is important. That's going to help you have your business continuity, but it has to be part of a bigger thing that's happening, which
yeah,
is you're responding to an incident, right? And so that means people are going to be doing forensics and incident response on all your systems to figure out that point where the breach actually occurred, not the ransomware thing, not the things they did inside to pivot. Those are all symptoms. The breach was the real problem. And until you actually address that, until you actually investigate the actual pervasive expanse that they might have in your network, until you eliminate and eradicate that threat internally, you're just restoring over. You're getting to a restore point that's just going to be owned again. Is all you're
yeah,
doing. And
yeah,
so it's real important, I think, to acknowledge that one, data breach, that's your real problem, and you should be unhappy and unsatisfied with yourself that it took you this long to identify it. To be fair, the attackers told you, you know, and then also, and then that means you have to investigate more. And I think actually, and the other reason that I came to Commvault is I think that there's not enough being like used in the from the data from backup data as a measure of for incident response. So like
yeah,
every system that's live that's been affected by that breach is suspect, right? That's the basic of every incident response digital forensics person, is that everything on here is suspect. The processes, the data, everything is
yeah,
tainted. If the backup is truly protected, then that means that backup and that metadata and that incremental backup is great for analysis to
yeah.
determine that golden point of restore. And so, is the air gap part solely like gonna solve any problems? No, I think it's a good place to do certain things. I would love if the word air gap was changed, but that information, that incremental backup and that metadata, I think really is powerful for incident responders to actually figure out what actually happened and when it happened and where it happened.
Yeah, I no, fully agree. And yeah, and look, these problems aren't going away. We know that it's going to continue. But hey, this has been a great conversation from my perspective. I always enjoy talking to you. Always learn a lot too. But at this point, what do you think about maybe taking some questions from the audience?
Yeah, sounds great. And yeah, thanks, man. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I've learned a lot from guys like you that have been doing the backup and the storage game. It's like, a lot of people think it's separate from cybersecurity, but it's clearly integrated. And I've learned a lot, and so yeah, it'd be great to take some questions.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah. Wow. Andy and Alex, enlightening conversation already with sophisticated takes on immutability, air gaps, layering, the challenges of finding a restore point. I could go on and on. Just like lots of gems in here. And we're gonna dig in deeper with questions from the audience. And while we're doing that, if you want to learn more about the partnership between Pure Storage and Commvault, just click on the links on the slide below. But let's get right into it. So, first question here. You mentioned that you talked a lot about different technologies being used to detect and thwart an attack. What guidance do you have around addressing the human aspects of thwarting an attack? So, Andy, maybe I'll kick that to you first, and then see if Alex has anything to add.
Sure. So, I mean, from a human perspective, a lot of it comes down to training, right? I mean, people are going to do what they know. And so, the more that we can train resources to be more effective security controls, the better, I would say, to a broad extent, right? So, we have a lot of focus, I would say, on end user awareness training. So, don't click on these bad links, don't open these attachments, that sort of thing. But we also need to focus on higher level executive types of training. So things like tabletop exercises where we can role play out events so that we're not caught off guard once we're in the middle of one, right? So basically in a tabletop, you bring executives and a bunch of folks into a room and you sit around a table and you literally role play out, hey, we're just hit by a ransomware attack. What do we do? How do things unfold? Okay, Active Directory is now offline. The news media is here. They want to talk to somebody. All these different things. And so, actively training and actively playing through different scenarios and events is absolutely critical to being able to both prevent and recover, when an attack of this type occurs. So, I would say focus on those two lines. Yes, continue to train your end users not to share passwords, not to click bad links or open bad attachments, but also, focus on of tabletopping. Alex, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Education obviously is one of the foundations. The other one, the tabletopping recommendations, really strong. I think the other thing it adds is, there is it's sort of assumed that everyone's just going to get along and be able to handle the situation, but it's a pretty stressful situation, and I think it's pretty valuable just to test out your communications and even so much as finding little missed things in your policies and your plans by just testing them out. Like maybe you need to have a secondary set of comms that you only use when a breach happens because you don't necessarily want to be using email on a compromised system. The other thing I would add would be that just basic adherence to all the foundations. I think everyone wants to do the advanced stuff. I think the foundational stuff is what people often get wrong and has the biggest impacts. Also, consider that the industry makes tools that are sort of disjoint and don't always mesh together to give you a seamless correlation between all of the meaningful events so that you can have real context as to what's actually happening on an event. And so try to figure out a way to set, if you're a decision maker or a leader, try to set up the tools and the workflow so that the people doing the work have it easy and so that they don't have to make a lot of heavy movements to find, the most resolution on the event as possible and remove as much white noise from that workload as you can so that they can focus on the really important high priority things and not just be doing an endless hamster wheel of Jira tickets kind of thing.
Yeah, you want to avoid that hamster wheel. Excellent. Andy, this one's for you. Nagarjuna has been sort of refining questions over the course of the presentation. Had questions about immutability, and then you started talking about that. So this is kind of version 3.0 from them. But they were asking, when we already have immutable backup solutions, is it even better if we use safe mode in pure storage?
I mean, the short answer is absolutely. The slightly longer answer is, this is about layered defense, right? So Alex briefly touched on layered defense and defense in depth as a sort of concept here, right? What we want to focus on is having recoverability at multiple tiers throughout an infrastructure. So the whole concept that we have, pure tiered resiliency architecture, is all focused on that. Where you can recover from a protected snapshot, and protected does not mean just immutable, right? Immutable is great; it's certainly important, but you need indelible, you need super immutable snapshots that can't be deleted by anyone, even an administrator, right? So having those snapshots available in early tiers gives you an ability to basically get your data back and get up and running, at least into a sandbox environment, very, very quickly, much faster than coming off of a backup. So, where you have that opportunity, you want to leverage it. But let's be clear, not every application is necessarily going to be a fit for leveraging those snapshots. So, that's why we still have backup and where backup plays a strong role, right? So, again, the short answer is absolutely, you need to have immutable snapshots in your environment. More importantly, you need indelible or super immutable snapshots in your environment. And lastly to it again, you need to have a tiered resiliency architecture that has tiers of recoverability, preferably 3 or 4, that starts with those snapshots on your primary tier, has a middle tier for forensics, and then has a backup tier for longer term recoverability. Hopefully that answered the question. If not, drop another one in the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks for that question. So what are I like this question. They're asking, what are 1 or 2 of the best ways to detect a breach that won't cost me an arm and a leg?
You want to start with that, Alex, and then I can follow you?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think the main thing is to keep the people who are doing the detecting, the threat intel guys, the SOC guys, educating the users to actually submit those responses. I think, honestly, I'm going to say, this isn't, backed by any kind of actual factual evidence, but my feeling is that majority of the incidences that I was involved in started with a user saying, "Hey, this is weird," or an admin seeing something and saying, "Hey, this is weird." It'd be nice if we had these super AI systems pointing this stuff out to us, but unfortunately, these systems are full of events, and those events have to be correlated, and that means that someone has to tell those machines what bad looks like. And so I think the cheapest way is like you were saying earlier, educate your people, make sure that there are really good comms and a friendly culture for an encouraging culture for reporting those events when they happen. I mean, those are your cheap, free EDRs, the humans, right? And also make sure the workload on the people doing the work on insecurity is focused where it needs to be, and not full of false positive stuff as much as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the only thing I would add is, because I agree with Alex on those points. I mean, the staff that you have are going to be your best first line of defense, right? But where you're understaffed or where you aren't able to focus those resources on maybe responding quickly enough, it might be worth looking for a partner in the space. Something like an Arctic Wolf or something like. Again, I don't. Not here to promote a specific service necessarily, but I think, the focus should be augment your team with the resources and tooling that you can't provide yourself. and be very clear with what you can and can't do, I think is the other thing.
Yep.
Don't pretend that you can have full visibility. You can run a full Splunk instance or Elastic instance and have the right tooling, as Alex said, to correlate across network, endpoint, and end user, and be able to orchestrate events out to cyber threat hunt teams that can then take action on anomalous events. If you don't have the staffing to do all that stuff or the tooling to do all that stuff, I mean, be honest with yourselves and with management, and explain, look, there's a lot of gaps that we have. So we need to somehow augment our team and capability if we want to be able to respond accordingly.
Yeah, I agree. And the other part of that is I mean, it's clear, they have the resources and the focus to get the individuals and also the work to keep the interests of the individuals who work in that area. If you don't have that, I mean, maybe there is a way for you to find and dedicate those resources very specifically to the things that matter to you most. Everyone would love to protect everything on their network, but the reality is, life's an analog and you have priorities. You've got that 5-pound bag of resources and that 20-pound bag of assets that you have to find a resource for. So you have to pick the most important 5 pounds out of that 20 pounds. And so, I think finding the professionals is one thing, and just being focused on what really matters to you and what's really going to hurt your company. And also acknowledging that, okay, if we don't have the money, then this is what's at risk here. And so, let's just be honest about it and clear about what we're doing when we don't have those resources dedicated to protecting that.
Yeah, I was going to come back with that, Alex, and talk about, risk acceptance, right? Because in some cases, you just have to accept the risk that you aren't going to do certain things, right? But I think it's fair to acknowledge what those things are that you're not going to be doing.
Yep, absolutely. It has to be on the table, has to be written, has to be acknowledged. It's not you're saying, I don't care if anybody takes advantage of me here. It's you're saying, I acknowledge my vulnerability here, and so I will be aware and have a plan for when it gets taken advantage of.
Right.
Okay. All right. Super. You guys both talked about that famous Mike Tyson quote about everybody having a plan until they get punched in the face. And that may have led to this next question, which is, have either of you ever experienced a customer getting attacked multiple times? And how did those customers manage the second attack differently?
I'm trying to think.
I'm happy to start if you want, Alex, or
go ahead.
You want to start? Up to you.
Nope, go ahead.
So absolutely. In fact, nowadays it's not that uncommon because, from an attack perspective, the way a lot of these attack teams work is they plant several indicators of compromise in an environment, more than just a ransomware payload, for instance, and contexting with ransomware because that's what, the core topic was today. But, it doesn't mean that they don't have other things. And a lot of times after an attack is complete, so whether the attacker gets paid or not, they'll take those additional indicators of compromise and they'll sell them to others. So they might sell them to a different attack team, right? So company A gets hit by an attack today. They might not find all the IOCs that were left behind by that attacker. And the attacker will go on the dark web, sell those IOCs to, another attack group who might then be able to leverage those to launch a secondary attack. So, when you get hit by one, I would say the chances of getting hit by a second and possibly even a third goes way up because, someone's been in your environment for some period of time, planting backdoors, planting, indicators of compromise that can be used for malicious intent. So know that that's likely the case. And, even the best of forensics teams can't find everything.
Yeah, I would say, so that, definitely there's the, as far as clients go, I can't really specifically think of any, but I can say, the current like, data that's out there right now is that there are lots of indications. I think there's a statistic that says that there is a greater percentage, like 80% or something like that, of the companies that have been ransomware that will be ransomware again, or some malware event will happen a second or third time. 80% of the ones that have reported that it happened the first time, it will happen again, which is a large number. It makes no sense to me because I figured the first time it happened, you would take it very seriously and would do something. But I think again, like I think that it's an indicator of how there's lots of things that are failing in the way that we're doing this stuff that it happened the first time at all, and so or that when it did happen, the ransomware was the notification, was the detection that you had that it happened. I think that this is like going into the 1% of the very skilled hackers, is that from that perspective, yeah, if this target was very important to you, you would have your your normal way in, and then if you had the opportunity to, you would try to devise another path in that would be used when break glass kind of thing. And so that'd be one aspect of it, and then the other one is there's no honor among thieves. It's a very specialized economy and enterprise ransomware, and so there's nothing that says an initial access broker wouldn't sell that access to more than one group. There's nothing that says that he would do it by accident, because they're not really tracking that, or that one group would steal that access from another team, or that the stupid web shell that whatever initial access broker threw up there to give access to someone else couldn't be repurposed by multiple people during the time frame when they were selling it. Because I think that there's usually I've seen a lot of times where that initial access happens, and there's like a long time frame before the actual like activity of ransomware really starts happening. Just the pivoting part before the ransomware, the preparation. Usually, there's like sometimes months. A lot of times, I've seen months before that stuff actually happens, and so a lot of things can happen in between that initial access and when those groups get on. And so there's nothing that says that multiple groups aren't going to get on there, and that's really I think maybe part of that large number is less about maybe it doesn't say that the victim isn't learning from the situation. It maybe says that the crime is happening faster than anyone can react to it, to be honest. There's a lot of resource there, a lot of motivation there.
Okay, great. Next one comes from Kevin, who's and I'm interested in your takes on this as well. With both of you guys being CTOs and having experience with senior management. So the question is, I think that training in PR management and mitigation is crucial for large or key organizations. Too often, security teams are pressured into short-term or risky recovery procedures for the sake of allowing the CEO to save face with the press or a government bureaucrat. So I guess first off, does that comment resonate for you guys? And then I guess the other part of that would be, what are some best practices for the C-suite in the instance of an event?
I'll start. I'll say that
So,
I think
go
I've
ahead,
been.
Alex. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think I've been lucky and fortunate in the sense that the people that I've interacted with that were the higher decision makers on these incidences weren't like very like they were doing or making decisions that would compromise my ethics as a cybersecurity professional. But I've also learned over the years that there's an analog to this sort of decision making. Any sort of extreme viewpoint, I think, doesn't really work very well. You can't expect anyone to just dedicate 100% of their resources to cybersecurity, because they'd have no profit to actually be the company they are. So maybe I've been lucky in that sense that I haven't seen that. There's always been a balancing act, and I think there should be a balancing act. But yeah, I mean, companies have for sure, those decision makers have certain responsibilities and training and education, and just who they are leans towards making those decisions and making statements that are part of their job. So, but I never have seen any of that. I've always seen both sides of that. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of it when you think about events in the media, right, and how organizations respond, a lot of it comes back to training. Have they prepared up front for the event? Have they done a tabletop exercise? Do they know how events are actually going to unfold when something goes bump in the night? Those that prepare generally respond, much better, right? They know what the process is going to be. They have well thought out and determined actions that they're going to take. Those that don't prepare are often running around with their hair on fire. Not that the ones that are prepared aren't doing that, but they're running around with their hair on fire trying to figure it out in real time. And that's a much harder job when you've got a whole bunch of people just firing things at you nonstop, right? So I think it's really important to have the opportunity to know how you're going to respond from a C-suite perspective before you're in the middle of one of these events. And the reality is when a business goes down, right? So if you take MGM, because they were in the news most recently, right? When they're down, the number one thing that you're trying to do is get back up and running, right? Nothing else matters at that point. You've got to get the business back online as quickly as you can. And so, a lot of focus has to go into that space. Are you going to cut corners? Yeah, sometimes you are. That means you're likely going to have cleanup work after the fact that you're going to have to go do, right? But you have to, it's kind of like triage and medicine. You have to stop the bleeding first.
Yeah, I agree. I think as you get a little bit more, when you see a broader picture of the situation, you'll realize that, like I said, on one end there's extreme security, but nothing works, and on the other end there's nothing but business, but none of it's secure, and neither one of those makes any sense. You'll have to find sort of a range of things, and you'll have to adjust to the situation. But obviously, a company that doesn't make money can't pay for security. So what's there to protect? And also consider the rumor and the things that you read in the news aren't. It's been my experience that it's not often very true. Sometimes how a situation looks from the outside is different than the inside, and also there's probably no money in telling a story where a company did all the right things and responded correctly and it had no impact. It'd probably be a super boring article.
No, but it'd be a great case study.
Yeah.
For one of you guys. Those are great. So, we've got way more questions that we can get to, but I did want to ask this one because it gets back to sort of the topic of the day, meeting data protection demands with tiered resiliency. They're asking, what advice would you give to those starting to evaluate their current cyber resilience position? So maybe Andy first.
Yeah. So, when you're first evaluating, you've got to decide what level of investment you want to make. Because Alex, to Alex's point, right? You could go all in on cybersecurity and resiliency and say, yeah, we want to do it the right way. We want to do everything by the book, and it's going to have a cost of X, right? And you could go the opposite direction, say we want to do the bare minimum, and that's going to have a cost of Y. And then there's probably some happy medium in the middle, right? But I think you have to understand first, what are you trying to protect? What's your risk posture going to be? And from there, you can start to work your way out. Like, what are your most critical applications that you're going to have to recover as a result of that decision? And you start to prioritize. But remember that as you prioritize, you're going to have dependencies. So even though you might prioritize, asset A or application A as your most important, it may have dependencies B and C around it that are also going to have to fall into that mix. And you may not have necessarily wanted or considered them, as part of that. So, I think it's all around risk, the level of risk tolerance that you want to have as an organization, and then beginning a prioritization process that will lead you down the path of, architecting the right solution. But again, make sure when you architect, you're figuring out how you can build recoverability in tiers, right? Have a tiered resiliency architecture so that you can work your way in, so to speak, from the application primary, have a middle tier, and then have a backup tier, So you've got recoverability in multiple forms. You don't want to just rely on one form of recovery nowadays.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think the very start of it is like, the stuff that I have the most experience in, which is, find out what all your assets are that are important to you. I mean, you're going to have a lot of assets, but not all of it is your crown jewels. You've got this event in the very beginning. You're eating an elephant. You have to find a place to start with, and I think you should start with, the most important assets you have, and also understand that depending on who you ask in the company, it was my experience when I would do these security assessments. I would ask, okay, what's the crown jewel to each of the stakeholders? And each stakeholder was 100% sure that they knew exactly what the most important crown jewel was, and they were all different usually. And so figure out, of those crown jewels, what is actually the most important, like, priority of those things, and then work backwards from there. Like, how do you control access to those things? How do you monitor access to those things? How do you alert on that monitoring? Who gets access to them? How they get the access? All those things, the whole NIST thing, working backwards, and then design a solution there to protect, monitor, alert, all that stuff. And then, to your point, Andy, this is where, the new space for me that I'm learning about is the data is one of your assets, and data is a lot of different things now. Data is not just information; it's also infrastructure. It's a lot of things, and so making those things also part of your assets to be considered for crown jewels, and then treating them at that priority, and making sure that you have a way to back that up and make that backup resilient, and make sure that restore can happen with integrity and speed that is understood, as that we were talking about, during our conversation. It's important to understand how physics work and how fast, bits can move across from one place to another to get restored, and then make sure to get all that laid out so that you understand what's going to happen when an incident happens, so that you're not surprised, and so that you can account for it and make adjustments. Maybe when you see exactly how long it's going to take, suddenly priorities change. Like, well, if we only do these things or focus on this would go faster, then that needs to happen first. That's kind of what's going to change how you tune what you do. And so I think that's going to be my approach, and sort of putting protections around all of those things as well.
Okay. All right. Well, Alex, Andy, I've really enjoyed being a fly on the wall for this conversation. It's been just a mature, sophisticated conversation about all these topics. Can't thank you guys enough for coming on today and sharing all your insights.
Thank you.
This has been great. Thanks so much.
All right. And before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Joshua Clark from Missouri. So congratulations to Joshua Clark. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Pure Storage and Commvault and Alex and Andy for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for all of your great questions today. That concludes this event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.